First of all, there is a built-in motivation for a lot of different groups to try to take responsibility for these kinds of attacks, because there's a turf war going on between ISIS, the Islamic State, AQAP, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, old school central al-Qaeda, which is a very different organization now than it was under bin Laden, now that Ayman al-Zawahiri is in charge of it. France has been actually fighting its own war in Mali and elsewhere in Africa, using drone strikes and attacks and supporting the United States, battling against al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. So we have to take everything that all of these groups say about this, with a great deal of skepticism. But what is clear to me, both from the reporting that we've seen at other news outlets and also from my own sources, is that AQAP, at a minimum, had these brothers in a camp, a training camp in Yemen, provided them with training, discussed with them, I understand from sources inside of Yemen, the idea that they should be attacking media outlets that have published the image of the Prophet Muhammad, particularly those that have published the image of the Prophet Muhammad in a demeaning or what they consider to be a disgraceful manner. The context of this, Amy, is that in June of 2010, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula released its first issue of a glossy, very fancy designed magazine in the English language called Inspire. And in that magazine, they had an image that was centered around the idea of a cartoon crusade. And they called on Muslims in the West to avenge the reputation and the sanctity of the Prophet Muhammad by going and killing cartoonists who were participating in a Draw Muhammad Day. And the show, South Park on Comedy Central, did a whole issue about this where they mocked the Prophet Muhammad. And they actually published a list of cartoonists, some of the cartoonists that had drawn the Prophet Muhammad in this manner, including a woman in Seattle, Washington named Molly Norris. And she had to go underground and change her name and received federal protection from the FBI. And I think to this day she still is underground, believing that she remains on this hit list. So this was something that was a major campaign initiated by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And my understanding is that these two brothers were doing this in concert to some degree with AQAP. Now, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula officials have told me that we directed this attack. That's very...
How did they get in touch with you?
I mean, I don't want to discuss, as the CIA says, I want to discuss sources and methods, but I will say this about this source. I've spent a lot of time in Yemen, including in areas controlled by al-Qaeda, and I would never just print something that I received from a random person whose identity I couldn't verify. Also, this isn't a source that just popped out of thin air for this story. This is the source of this information is someone that in the past has given me information about what al-Qaeda was going to say, or the fact that al-Qaeda was holding particular hostages before it was made public, as a way of validating that they, in fact, do have access to the highest levels of debate and discussion within the leadership of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. But I should say, just by way of context, well-placed sources within AQAP saying this is not an official statement from the leadership of al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And before we go sort of all in and say, yeah, this definitely was AQAP that directed this plot or financed this plot, the normal way that AQAP would validate this would be to release statements and audio or video recordings through their official media channels. They have their own online television station. They have their own way of releasing things on discussion boards. Over the past year, they've started to shift more to Twitter in terms of announcing, making pronouncements or announcing actions that they've taken, hostages that they've taken, assaults or raids inside of Yemen that they've conducted. So what I'm going to be looking for in the coming weeks is if there's a martyr video that was filmed in Yemen by either of these brothers, or if AQAP is able to produce photographs of them at a training camp. That's what happened when Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib tried to blow up the airplane over Detroit on Christmas Day 2009. After that happened, AQAP eventually took responsibility, and then they began to release media showing, hey, this guy was with us in Yemen, and they actually released a martyr video where Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, this young Nigerian man, explained what he was going to do and why he was going to do it. So until that happens, I think that what we have here is a very reliable source in terms of accuracy within AQAP saying this, and now the U.S. is saying that they believe that their working assumption is that AQAP was involved. My understanding is that both Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib, and at least one of these brothers spent time at Iman University in Sana'a in Yemen. And that's a university founded by a cleric named Zindani, who is a very, very famous radical Yemeni preacher. He denies that he has any ties to terrorism, but his message is definitely in sync, more or less, with groups like al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And John Walker Lynn, for instance, studied at that university. It definitely is a place where people go and then somehow find themselves going to training camps inside of Yemen. The idea that they would have been there at the same time, if in fact everything we understand to be true about these brothers is true, would not be surprising at all.